For those of you who are just joining us, I want to mention that due to an urgent family matter, Charlie Angus is not able to join us tonight. Again, he sent a video greeting us, and we will play that now.
Hello everyone, bonjour à tous. I'm very sorry, my friends, that I can't be there tonight with you in Victoria. My sister is very sick and she's been moved into palliative. And as excited as I was to be back on Vancouver Island, I just can't leave her at this time. But I want to thank everyone for the beautiful messages of support. It's really grounded me and made me realize that in times like this that we are part of a bigger family and a much broader community. Je suis très désolé, mes amis. Il n'est pas possible de participer à cet événement ce soir, mais j'ai beaucoup de respect pour mes collègues, Nikki, Guy, Jagmeet. Je suis très fier de participer à ce processus de renouvellement de notre parti. You know, since this campaign has launched, I've been in 8 provinces, over 45 communities, over 100 events. Why? Because it is necessary to build our movement at the grassroots, to encourage people to believe that it's possible to have a social democratic party that is rooted in our grassroots members, that can win, so that our families don't have to accept less just because the 1% demand more. You know my work in Parliament, my friends. You know that I've been a tireless fighter for justice, and I bring that determination and that energy to this campaign, because our movement is needed now more than ever. This fall, in Parliament, it will be a lobbyist feeding frenzy as the Trudeau government open NAFTA, lead a full-on attack on defined pension plans, set up the sell-off of our public assets. It's essential that we have a leader in the House with the experience and the determination to stand up to this agenda, a leader who understands that what we need in this country is economic justice, environmental justice, and Indigenous justice. And you don't get one unless you get all 3. A leader who can build the grassroots to get us ready for 2019. This is what I've done my whole life, whether it's been organizing environmental campaigns, working with Indigenous youth across the country, or helping to put the building blocks to win in ridings all across the north. My friends, I am honored to do this work, and I ask you for your support. Mes amis, il y a beaucoup de pain sur la planche, mais c'est possible de donner un nouveau souffle au mouvement progressiste partout au Canada. Je suis gonflé à bloc pour les jobs. Je suis Charlie Angus. Vous comptez sur moi. I want to thank you, my friends. I will see you in better times very, very soon. I got your back.
I'd just like to briefly remind everyone to hold your clapping to the end. I know you're exuberant, but thank you. Thank you, Charlie. We wish you all the best during this difficult time. I'd like to take a moment to explain one specific element of the format of today's debate. Each of the candidates has a cue card with them at their table. At any point throughout the debate, whenever they choose, if they raise this cue card, they will get to speak for an additional 30 seconds whenever the current response or debate is concluded, but they can only do it once. If 2 candidates raise their cards during the same response, I will use my best judgment to determine who raised their card first. And that person will get their 30 seconds first out of the 2. Now let's begin. Good luck to all of the candidates. We'll start with an opening statement of 60 seconds from each candidate. Jagmeet Singh, you are first. Please begin.
Thank you so much. Hey everybody, it's so great to be back in Victoria. This leadership race, we have an incredible opportunity to grow our party. We need to bring in new members, new volunteers, and donors to build our movement. We owe it to Canadians to form government in 2019 so that we can realize the social, economic, and environmental justice that our country so badly needs. Les infrastructures publiques doivent rester publiques. Nous devons placer les gens devant les profits. I believe in universal, publicly delivered social programs, but it's not good enough to defend them. We must expand them. Childcare, pharmacare, dental care, and free tuition. The only way to do that is to grow our party, to grow our base and the power of our party. That's what I'm doing, and I will continue to do as your leader. Thank you.
Please hold your applause. Thank you very much. Nikki Ashton, you're next.
Today we are in an unceded Lekwungen territory, and it is great to be in NDP country. Charlie, we miss you, and our thoughts are with you and your family. There's something happening in this country. From coast to coast to coast, people are coming together. Workers, students, Indigenous peoples, activists involved in social movements, ordinary Canadians, les gens qui militent au NPD et les gens qui n'ont jamais milité. People have had enough of growing inequality. People want to act to stop climate change. We want fundamental change. Voici la raison d'être de notre campagne. Building a movement for social, environmental, and economic justice for all, with grassroots action and many small donors, half of whom have given $30 or less. It's time to dream again of equality and justice, of leaving this planet in better shape than we found it. It is time for a politics to believe in again.
Guy Karen, you are next, and I noticed that you raised your cue card. Thank you.
Mes amis, je suis très heureux d'être de retour à Victoria. J'étais ici il y a 3 semaines et déjà on pouvait sentir l'optimisme dans l'air. Je suis vraiment inspiré par la campagne que John Horgan et son équipe ont menée et par le programme progressiste qu'ils ont mis de l'avant. And I think that the early work we've seen from John in responding to wildfires is actually demonstrating that voters made the right choice. I take even more inspiration from John because, like me, he is not the flashiest guy, but he truly cares about people and truly loves his province. I'm driven by a real desire to fight injustice and to give each and every person in our country a fair chance to thrive. I dream of a Canada that fights to eliminate poverty and succeeds. Eliminating poverty is no pipe dream. In fact, it should be central to every decision we make as a party. My progressive basic income proposal and my workers' first job plan are a big first step in that direction. It may come as a surprise to you, but I do like to talk policy. Make no mistake, though. My likeness and my love of good policy is born of a passion to fight injustice. I don't need to tell you that winning as a New Democrat is always harder, but I do believe that developing bold, concrete plans will be key to defeating Trudeau in 2019. Opportunity is the great equalizer. When people stop surviving, they start thriving, and then opportunity becomes reality. And that, my friends, is worth fighting for. Thanks.
Thank you, candidates. Now let's get right to the first question. It is asked to all of the candidates, and you'll each have a chance to respond for 1 minute. Jagmeet will be first. Here's the question. Victoria has the lowest vacancy rate for rental housing of any city in Canada, and the cost of home ownership in Victoria and Vancouver has skyrocketed in recent years. What specifically should the federal government do to address the housing affordability crisis?
Well, first off, we need to have a national housing strategy. It's been decades since we've actually seen a plan that's designed and developed to actually address this issue. The reason why we're in this position is because we've seen subsequent liberal and conservative governments do nothing on this file. And I thought this issue was something localized to Vancouver or Toronto or maybe Victoria, urban centers that are larger. But I was in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and people there are talking about the housing crisis. This is an issue that's impacting young people, and not just home ownership. Even renting a home is something that people can't even achieve. So what we need to do is we need to commit to national housing strategy. We need to support cooperative housing as a mechanism to ensure that people have access to housing. We also need to look at the decommodification of housing. That's one of the root issues. Speculation and other issues have driven up the cost of housing so much that it's literally not affordable, and rent has also suffered as a result. We need to do something about this problem immediately. This is a serious crisis in our country. Guy
Caron, you are next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Don't believe this is an issue that only affects larger cities. We have the same problem in places like Rimouski, which is a small town. And it's a problem that we're seeing all across the country. We hear a lot about Vancouver, Victoria, or Toronto, but it's a reality that's born out of the fact that the federal government, by and large, and many provincial government came out of the social housing game, came out of the co-op housing arrangements as well. The first thing that we need to do is to go back to what worked before. I mean, the CMHC actually used to be in social housing. It's not anymore. It's letting all the co-op housing agreements expire. basically, the federal government is disengaging itself even more from that problem, which is a pan-Canadian problem in essence. So we need to give the CMHC its original function of working towards social housing, working toward co-op housing. And remember, a couple of weeks ago, CMHC gave back $4 billion to the government.
Nikki Ashton, you were next.
When you think of the face of inequality in Canada, housing is one of the top things that comes up. I'll never forget when we did our national tour on the rise of precarious work in the millennial generation. A young woman in Vancouver was in tears talking about how heartbreaking it was to know that she will never be able to afford to live in the city that she calls home. It's clear to me that we need federal leadership when it comes to housing, and I'm proud that our campaign has put forward the most bold platform when it comes to housing. And we're combining the need to invest in housing with the need to tackle climate change. So we've committed $10 billion in the construction of 40,000 social and affordable housing units per year as part of our mandate if we are to get elected. It's clear that housing across the country needs to be addressed. It is clear that speculation, and we need to put a stop to those that are benefiting from exploiting housing insecurity across this country. But at the end of the day, what's required is federal leadership to stand up on behalf of Canadians.
Now we will move to a period of open debate amongst all three candidates. I'll ask a question and the floor will be open to all of you for 4 minutes. Here is the question. Failure to adequately consult and accommodate Indigenous communities on major resource projects has resulted in lengthy legal cases and the delay or cancellation of many projects. How would you seek to change the review process to respect Indigenous communities?
So I'd begin by saying, and I think it's really appropriate that we're having this conversation here in BC, where the NDP won government for many reasons, including a very clear stance to work with First Nations, to work in solidarity with First Nations and respect the Indigenous right to consent when it comes to resource extraction and development projects. I think what's absolutely critical, as you have committed to here, is that we commit to adopting and implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People at the national level. I want to acknowledge the work of Romeo Saganash on this front. I want to also acknowledge the activism that Charlie Angus has put forward on this front. It is clear that we need a framework like UNDRIP to be able to move forward when it comes to working with Indigenous peoples. It's not good enough to say that we're going to consult. It's clear, and UNDRIP makes it very clear that we need consent to move forward.
What we also notice is that we have decisions like the federal government's betrayal of the people of BC to go ahead with something like Kinder Morgan, something that I'm firmly opposed to and something that I know that all BC activists, environmentalists are opposed to as well. But we know that the process didn't take into consideration coastal Indigenous peoples. And that's a shameful dereliction of their duties of the federal government to actually consult with and achieve the consent of the Indigenous communities that are impacted by it. So we need at a federal level, at a minimum, if we talk about reconciliation, reconciliation is meaningless if there's no implementation of UNDRIP. If we don't actually follow through on the idea that we need to have a nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples and we need to have their consent for any projects, that's not true reconciliation. This government has betrayed us on that front.
And I would say that consent is actually the key. I mean, I've been consistent in the last 4 years asking for a complete reform of the National Energy Board, which is basically a co-opted regulator. It's captured regulator, and the consultation process doesn't work. It's not working because there's no real consultation when you exclude over 90% of the people who want to appear at hearings. And there has to be a parallel process for First Nations, Indigenous people. And that parallel process needs to ensure that we don't only consult, because consultation often is just lip service. We just consult and we hear about what they have to say and then we forget about them. This consultation process needs to move towards consent, so it's key.
Absolutely. I mean, reconciliation really means that we have to confront the legacy of genocide that as a Canadian, as a society, we need to confront that, both direct and indirect. And one of the meaningful ways we can confront that legacy is to say that when it comes to decisions that happen on this land, the Indigenous people, the first people of this land, have true authority, have true decision-making involvement in the process, and are truly members of that, are participating in that decision-making. So far, we've not seen that, and that's not truly representing the spirit of reconciliation.
And it's clear to me that that we have to talk about not fighting First Nations in court, which the federal government is doing every single day, and are forcing First Nations that are already strapped in terms of resources to go to court to simply fight for the rights that are already theirs. You know, I'm reminded of the words of a friend of mine in Saskatoon, an Indigenous activist, who said, Nikki, it's really simple what we want. Erica is her name. She said, all we want is that when we say we don't want pipelines on our land, for the federal government to listen to us and stand with us. That way we can use the same kind of blood, sweat, and tears we use to fight them towards building better and stronger communities. That is the kind of message that I bring forward.
I think natural resources have to be the key also towards self-autonomy and self-governance from First Nations. If they are moving in that direction, we need to ensure that they will have the tools for to control their own destiny, and natural.
Now we will have another question to all the candidates. You will each have 60 seconds to respond. The question is, the opioid crisis continues to result in a tragic and shocking toll of overdose deaths throughout the country. What should the federal government do to address this public health crisis? The first respondent is Guy Caron.
Thank you very much. I'd like first to acknowledge the good work that my friend Don Davies has done on this file as health critic. He was actually one of the first ones to ring the alarm on this crisis here in British Columbia. And I think the federal government has been sleeping at the switch on this because it has affected countless communities. We hear of this problem, of course, in Vancouver. We heard about it in Victoria. We hear about it all across the country. And the response is very tepid. And what we need to do at this point is to ensure that we will have some control at the border, some more stringent response from our authorities, and we need to ensure that there will be help for the people who are on the grounds and are victim of this. We think of trying to, when we're thinking of this type of crisis, we're thinking of trying to regulate through law and order. It doesn't work. What we need to ensure is to accompany those who are in that situation in the streets, and unfortunately, we are showing too little compassion.
Jagmeet Singh, you are next.
Thank you. We need to immediately declare this as a national health crisis that it is. It's shameful that in our country, there's been so many thousands of people devastated by this crisis. It's shameful that the government hasn't acted on this issue. This is literally devastating communities across our country. And so what we can do immediately, we know that we need to have safe injection sites. We need to focus on harm reduction. Right now, the approach to this crisis is to criminalize. This is a health concern, not a criminal justice issue. And we need to move towards decriminalization, harm reduction, and providing rehabilitation for people. This is something we can address. If we put the funds behind it, we can ensure that there are ways to support people that are in this crisis right now. We can provide the funding to support provincial initiatives to make sure that there is safe injection sites, but also the process right now is so difficult to approve safe injection sites. We need to make that process easier. This is a crisis and we need to address it immediately.
Nikki Ashton, thank you.
A few nights ago, I had the opportunity to have a meeting actually with the Vancouver Tenants Union on the downtown east side. And every few minutes during our meeting, sirens would go off, and a few times we'd have to stop talking. And somebody interrupted about 15 minutes into the meeting and said, those are sirens going off because someone's having an overdose. And they talked about the connection between housing insecurity and the opioid crisis and the lack of federal leadership frankly, on all fronts. Our campaign has called for a national health emergency to be called for. Our campaign has also called for investment in harm reduction and support for harm reduction approaches when it comes to dealing with the opioid crisis. Stephen Harper took our country far to the right when it came to making important decisions in terms of harm reduction. Justin Trudeau has done a little bit of work to bring us a little bit further back. Thanks to the work of Don Davies and obviously our team in the House, we're pushing even further. I'm also proud that our campaign is the only one with a substantive mental health platform. We need investments and leadership on all fronts.
We now have another question for each of the candidates. You'll get 60 seconds each, and you're going in the same order as before. Here's the question. The federal Liberals have closed the door to implementing electoral reform in a time for the next election, while here in BC, a path to proportional representation has emerged through cooperation with the Greens. If you were a leader, how would you advance electoral reform and build public support to implement it? Guy Caron, you are first.
It's very simple. I think people know here that I've not only called for electoral reform to be a main issue, once again, of the NDP, because we've been fighting for this for so long. But the problem that we are facing is the fact that Liberals, frankly, never had any intention of implementing electoral reform. I think we all realize that. They sabotaged any effort to move in that direction once Parliament resumed. And the fact is, because of this, there is some kind of a broken trust between the federal government and the people who really want this, this new system. So to ensure people that we know that this is needed, that we mean what we're saying, we need to ensure that people know it's a priority. And this is why I said that the first bill that will be tabled by an NDP government federally will be electoral reform in a proportional system, mixed proportional, with regional lists. And if we have the balance of power, it needs to be a condition for any support of a party in power.
Jagmeet Singh, you're next.
Thank you. I think what's at stake here is really the democracy of our country. And when we look at the current system, the current electoral system, it's not truly representing the voice of the people. And so it's a fundamental element of our democracy to improve it. People wanted it to be improved, and our current prime minister betrayed the trust of people. We need to make sure that's clear. So the path forward is, one, we need an education around what does it mean to have electoral reform, and particularly proportional representation, that it would give voice to the people. It would give power to the people when they make a vote, when they vote, that their voice would be reflected in Ottawa. The problem is that what we saw in a referendum in Ontario was without education, without providing the understanding of why this would benefit people, people actually didn't support the referendum. So we need to actually frame this as a way to bolster our democracy, a way to protect against things like Harper and right-wing agenda coming forward and people getting power with minimal or less than a majority of support of Canadians.
Nikki Ashton, you're next. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that when it comes to electoral reform, we acknowledge that Justin Trudeau lied to Canadians. And it's clear to me that there's a lot of people out there that are frustrated, that are angry about what he's done to break that promise, many of whom are young. And I just want to point out that in the next election, the largest voting bloc in Canada will be the millennial generation, a generation for whom electoral reform and proportional representation really matters. So I think, yes, the NDP needs to be at the forefront of pushing for electoral reform and proportional representation, but I think we need to be working with folks like young people, activists in social movements, working with communities that are often on the margins, Indigenous communities, racialized communities, immigrant communities, working to engage people who want their voice to be heard politically in a big way and are often ignored. That, I believe, is the way forward, and very much acknowledging that it's only the NDP that can champion electoral reform truly going into the next election.
Thank you. We will now have another 4-minute debate among all three candidates. The question is, British Columbia has benefited from its role as the gateway to the Asia-Pacific region. The federal government is currently looking at negotiating a trade deal with China. As a leader, what would be your approach to relations with China?
It's, in terms of trade agreements, we have been going the wrong way for so long. I mean, we've seen workers being marginalized and left because they were working in industries that paid the price for those trade deals. One key principle in negotiating trade agreements should be the respect of human rights. Human rights, labor rights, environmental rights. If we're talking about having fair trade rather than free trade, which I think we all agree with, we need to ensure that there will be agreements that will be framing this, this agreement towards fair trade. And trade and the respect of rights has to be first and foremost, and not only for China. It should be the case also for those agreements we already signed, especially with countries like Panama, like Honduras, like Colombia. And if we're not moving in that direction, then we're missing a great opportunity to be able to raise the standard of living, to raise the living conditions of the people in the countries with which we're signing. And
I think the discussion has been too much about free trade and not enough about fair trade. And that's absolutely right. We need to make sure that when it comes to any agreement, that the agreement has to put the interests of Canadians first and foremost. What we're seeing is many of the trade agreements that have been signed have benefited a small elite group of wealthy, but have not actually created benefit for everyday Canadians. And that's been a massive loss in terms of jobs, in terms of opportunities. We need to make sure also, as Guy was pointing out, absolutely, that if we have an agreement with other nations, those agreements have to be based on human rights. the rights to unionize, rights of workers in those countries, and also environmental protections. These are some key elements to any trade agreement, and that's what we need to push forward, and that's what I would push forward as leader.
So I'm very concerned that right now we have a prime minister who is a big cheerleader when it comes to the free trade deals that are being put out there, whether it's Canada-Europe, whether it's the TPP, even despite the fact that the U.S. Pulled out. This is a prime minister who's not disclosing what he's saying behind closed doors on NAFTA, something that trade agreement that affects tens of thousands of Canadians, across, hundreds of thousands if you look at in entire cities and regions as well. What we need is a federal government that will stand up for Canadian workers and that will stand up for Canadian communities. And I'm concerned about the discussions with China vis-a-vis this trade deal. It's clear that China is making some major demands that even extend to issues like temporary foreign workers and bringing in workers here from China with minimal protections, and that could have an impact on the working conditions of folks here at home. It is very important that we have a trade policy that seeks to put working people first, that rejects the kind of trade deals like the ones we have in front of us that put corporate greed ahead of working people, and that, yes, stands up for labor rights, environmental rights, and making sure that we aren't ceding our sovereignty the way we have in NAFTA and the way we are up for doing in the kind of trade deals that are ahead of us.
I'd say that we have been in the House the only sane voice about trade agreements. I mean, we hear liberals and conservatives always saying of the NDP, there's no agreement that you like. Well, there are some that we approved because they were respecting those conditions that we set forth, such as signing with a country that respects human rights, signing an agreement that will ensure that we have reciprocity. But when I'm looking at liberals and conservatives, they never said no to a single deal. And look at what's happening right now. There's a NAFTA council that's being created. And the Liberals, Justin Trudeau, just appointed James Moore and Bruno Ambrose. If you have any doubt that Liberals and Conservatives think alike and that we are the voice of sanity in trade agreements, but this is it.
Another big issue that we're seeing again and again with trade agreements is the attack on our sovereignty. The trade agreements that have been signed have actually limited our ability to make decisions in our very country. We're one of the most sued countries when it comes to NAFTA. We need to make sure that any trade agreement maintains our sovereignty and our decision-making ability to make sure we make decisions that...
We will now have a question period segment. In this portion of the debate, each candidate will be given a chance to ask a question of another candidate. The candidate asking the question gets to choose who and what they ask, and it is not known in advance. They have 30 seconds to ask their question. The responding candidate gets 30 seconds to respond, then the asking candidate gets 30 seconds for follow-up, and the respondent gets 30 seconds to conclude. The first candidate to ask a question is Nikki Ashton. Please proceed.
My question is to Jagmeet. I believe it's important that people know where we stand on key issues, and I want to ask you about your stand on the sex education curriculum in Ontario. You described it as a, quote, disrespectful to parents, unquote, and, quote, that it must respect the diversity of beliefs when it comes to educating our children, unquote. That's the kind of language I expect from conservatives. Why did you take this position on sex ed when it was strongly supported by the LGBTQ community?
Thank you for the question. As Deputy Leader of the province, I repeatedly endorsed the curriculum as well as the reasons for it. I was very vocal in supporting it. But one of the things that's really shameful to me is when a government comes forward with policies and doesn't provide information to racialized communities. It was disrespectful in terms of not providing information in different languages. And I was at a number of rallies where the right was allowed to spread all sorts of misinformation because the government failed to heed when I asked them to come and provide clarification.
So, Jagmeet, I entered politics because of the issue of same-sex marriage. Our NDP MP was against it, and I stood up against those that would have imposed their views on our society. But you called the sex ed curriculum, quote, disrespectful to the diversity of beliefs. What beliefs come ahead of the needs of our children, particularly so many kids that are discriminated against because of their gender identity and sexual orientation? And how can we trust that you're not going to take a position like that again?
So I absolutely support the improvement to the sex ed curriculum. It provides so much needed information. I fully endorsed it repeatedly. But what I do find that's offensive is a government, again, that didn't provide information to people in their language, that didn't provide all the amazing evidence that supports the much-needed changes. That was offensive to me. That's something that I continue to think is offensive. Government should provide the rationale for it when there's so much evidence that supports the needed changes. I'm someone that firmly supports the right.
Jagmeet Singh, you have the next question.
Sure. Can I just raise my...
Noted, thank you.
Okay, no, for the last one.
Oh, you want 30 seconds for the last one? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So as I was saying, no, it's really important to make this clear. I fully support same-sex marriage. I fully support the rights of the LGBTQ community. Listen, as a community that suffered so much in terms of racism, prejudice, discrimination, we are all in solidarity with equity-seeking communities. Human rights for one is human rights for all. We need to stand up in solidarity with all communities. It's something I firmly believe in, and I'm committed to, and I will continue to stand up on those issues.
You may now ask your question of another candidate, Jagmeet Singh.
Sure. Thank you very much. My question is to Guy. Guy, your Workers' First Agenda is a great and comprehensive policy. I encourage everyone to read it. Your plan mentions that you will work to promote full-time permanent work. As you know, the growth of precarious work is gendered and racialized. But I didn't see this being directly addressed in your policy. How does your plan to tackle directly the overrepresentation of women, youth, and newcomers when it comes to these type of jobs?
It's clear to me that this work has to be done jointly with the provinces, because the federal government has some say in the policies that we are implementing, but when we're talking about labor in the workplace, it can't be done without the provinces. So there are some great initiatives that is being done right now, and the problem that we are seeing is that those great initiatives are not shared between the provinces. Every province is working basically as a silo, and the federal government has to demonstrate a leadership in ensuring that the best practices are being shared with the provinces, and that's the first.
Oh, thank you very much. So one of the things that my Better Work Agenda recognizes is the rise of temporary work, but particularly through temporary job agencies. And I committed to ensuring that all workers employed through these agencies under federal jurisdiction receive the same pay and benefits as other employees, and that they become permanent after 6 months of work. This is something that I've been fighting for years, but I didn't see you mention this issue in your Workers' First Agenda. Would you consider incorporating this commitment into your plan?
Yeah. As someone who actually, and not many people know that, but I actually used to work in a temp agency in my youth when I was in university. And I've seen the abuses and excesses, and I've been victim also of some of these abuses and excesses taking place with very vulnerable workers. So I fully agree that a move in that direction in regulating in a more strict fashion those companies, that industry, has to be part of such a program.
Guy Caron, you have your question.
Thank you very much, and I will ask a question to Jagmeet. Sure. I'm sure you won't be surprised, but to me and many New Democrats, the proposal towards making old age security means tested is problematic. And I do know that you're a staunch New Democrat, but I want to ask you this. Old age security was universal until Brian Mulroney introduced a clawback in '89. Are you saying that Mulroney was right to do so?
So let me be very clear. What I believe in is a universal guarantee against seniors living in poverty. Right now, we have 600,000 seniors that live in poverty. What I'm proposing is that the Harper-era tax credits, the pension credit, and the old age credit be rolled into to enhance OAS, to make sure that seniors immediately are lifted out of poverty. So my plan and my proposal is to take the existing program and to enhance OAS so that seniors are supported with a basic income guarantee immediately.
Thing is, generations of New Democrats actually fought the elimination or the introduction of this clawback back in the 80s. If you read Linda McQuaig in The Wealthy Banker's Wife, you know that it's because it's a birthright and not a handout. And basically, what we need to do is to ensure that we are protecting those fights. What I basically want to ask is, are you accepting this frame that Mulroney, that his successor is actually implemented or created for this? Because it was a neoliberal frame of saying that, you know, we have to reduce it, we have to reduce accessibility, we have to ensure that we go in that direction, and that's their legacy.
So again, I want to be very clear. I believe in a universal guarantee against seniors living in poverty. I believe in enhancing the current OAS. The current OAS is not enough for seniors to live on to be able to live in a dignified and respectful manner. I believe in increasing the amount of OAS so that seniors can retire with dignity. I believe in getting rid of the Harper-era tax credits that are not used by all seniors, that are complicated, and enhancing OAS to make sure that it's a basic income guarantee for seniors so that seniors are...
Excellent. We will now have our one question in French for this debate. Candidates will have 60 seconds to respond. I'd like to welcome Guillaume Francoeur.
Merci, Jenai. Alors, nous allons passer à la seule question en français de ce débat et les candidats auront 60 secondes chacun pour répondre. Cette semaine, nous avons eu la preuve que des véhicules blindés canadiens ont été utilisés par l'Arabie saoudite contre la population civile. En tant que Premier ministre, quelles mesures prendriez-vous pour vous assurer que les armes fabriquées au Canada ne servent pas à violer les droits humains? Nikki Ashton, vous êtes la première.
En premier, j'aimerais reconnaître que notre équipe dans la Chambre des communes ait fait la preuve du leadership sur ce sujet. Ça fait des années, en fait. Moi, si j'étais élue comme chef, je mettrais fin, chef et ensuite premier ministre, je mettrais fin à ce type d'accord, l'achat de ces armements par l'Arabie saoudite. Il faut aussi attaquer la réputation de M. Trudeau qui s'appelle féministe. On n'est pas féministe quand on vend les armements à un régime comme celui de l'Arabie saoudite qui s'attaque aux femmes, qui cible les femmes, ainsi que les communautés LGBTQ. C'est clair qu'on a besoin du leadership et aussi il faut se tenir debout non seulement contre le vent d'armes, mais aussi pour la paix. Et je suis fière d'être une candidate qui se tient debout pour la paix, soit en Palestine, soit au Moyen-Orient, soit autour du monde.
Parfait, merci. Monsieur Singh.
Oui, merci beaucoup. C'est très clair que maintenant, on a un gouvernement qui ne respecte pas les droits de la personne. Parce que c'est clair, comme Nikki a dit, qu'il y a des régimes, des gouvernements qui ne respectent pas les droits de la personne, mais on vend les armements à ces pays. C'est très clair qu'on a besoin d'avoir une politique qui protège les droits de la personne. Donc, s'il y a un armement qui est fabriqué ici dans notre pays, il faut assurer les gens qu'on ne vend pas les armements comme ça aux des pays qui ne respectent pas les droits comme ça. C'est très clair aussi, on a un gouvernement qui a dit, oui, nous sommes, comme Nikki a dit, que nous sommes un pays, je suis un Premier ministre qui est féministe, mais c'est tellement vrai ce que Nikki a dit, qu'on vend les armements aux pays qui ne respectent pas les droits des femmes aussi.
Parfait, merci beaucoup. Monsieur Caron.
Les libéraux nous ont tellement menti sur le sujet. Je vais dire le mot carrément. Ils nous ont menti parce qu'initialement, ils nous ont dit qu'on ne pouvait pas résilier le contrat. Et on pouvait résilier le contrat. On n'était pas rendu au bout du processus. Et vous savez, il existe un processus présentement pour évaluer l'impact d'une transaction comme celle-ci ou d'une autorisation comme celle-ci sur les droits de la personne. Le ministère des Affaires mondiales, ou peu importe comment ça s'appelle aujourd'hui, avait averti le gouvernement que ça serait à l'encontre de nos principes par rapport au respect des droits de la personne que de vendre cet équipement à l'Arabie saoudite. Et les libéraux ont fait la sourde oreille. Alors, ce n'est pas comme si on n'avait pas des principes présentement qui nous permettent d'assurer la primauté des droits de la personne dans les transactions que nous avons. C'est le fait que les gouvernements que nous avons élus ne respectent pas ces principes et qu'ils ne respectent pas non plus l'avis du Parlement lorsqu'on leur soumet le fait qu'ils s'en vont contre les principes et qu'ils aident à pouvoir opprimer la population de leur pays.
We'll now have another question for open debate amongst all of you, this time for 2.5 minutes. The question is, many seniors want to live at home even if they are dealing with health challenges, but a lack of affordable quality home care means this often isn't an option. What should the federal government do to improve quality of life for seniors who want to remain independent as long as possible?
I think we need to acknowledge first and foremost that seniors absolutely have the right to live in their home, to live in dignity and respect. And that means we need to make sure there's funding that supports home care. Right now, with respect to our healthcare system in general, we're seeing years and years of subsequent conservative and liberal governments that have cut the healthcare funding. We need to ensure that there's a specific envelope in our funding for healthcare that targets and that addresses this issue of home care, that ensures that people can live in their home with dignity and respect. I've also proposed as a plan a Canada Seniors Guarantee to ensure that seniors receive a basic income guarantee. We need to ensure that seniors who've given so much to our country, to our society, are supported and protected and taken care of in their retirement and their old age.
So I would say that fighting for home care is integral to the NDP approach to health care in particular. I'm proud to come from a province in Manitoba where it's the NDP government that brought in universal access to home care. And it's clear to me that, that it's the NDP that's always pushing this issue. But what we need federally is a government, an NDP government, that will push to reverse the cuts that Harper made to health care, cuts that Trudeau has kept in place. As that pot shrinks in terms of funding, everybody, and particularly those that need health care most, including seniors, and particularly seniors, are going to be mostly impacted. So that's why we've said we need to reverse these cuts, we need to invest in health care, and we actually need to go further. And our campaign has talked about the need for universal pharmacare, universal dental care, and federal investment in a mental health strategy.
I think that's absolutely correct. If you think about the direction that we've headed in, if we see seniors living at home, we know that the cost of medication are increasing. We need to ensure that the full dream of Tommy Douglas was not just to stop at universal health care, but it's to go to universal pharmacare as well. That would actually significantly help seniors be able to live in their home.
Thank you very much. Over and above that, I used to work at the Council of Canadians, and I was working on healthcare issues, so this issue was very close to my heart. I was working against privatization, but I was also working, and I come back to the issue of working in silos. There are good things happening in some provinces on home care. There are some good things happening in provinces on long-term care, palliative care, preventative care, and they're not talking to each other. The federal role has to provide the resources that the provinces need, for sure, but it's also to ensure that there is communication between the provinces so that those best practices would be shared for the benefits of all.
Thank you. We will now have another question, and you'll each have a chance to reply for 60 seconds. Across the country, more than 100,000 Canadians serve in the Canadian Forces in the Reserves or as civilian employees of the Department of National Defence. They often face struggles in getting the support they need, particularly when it comes to mental health care. What would you propose to improve the lives of Canadian Forces members and their families? Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you very much. I think this is something that we really need to think long and hard about. We have people in our country that have sacrificed so much for our country, that have served, men and women have served in the armed forces, but it's shameful that our government, that conservative and liberal governments, have not provided adequate supports for veterans. They've not provided adequate supports for people that have given so much to our country. We need to absolutely ensure that not only do veterans get support service to be able to retire in dignity, but also any of the services they need to address the health concerns that arise from some of the difficult positions that they're in. This is an incredible test of our country, that we make sure that those men and women are supported, are given the services they need, are given the mental health, the access to mental health services they need. My father's a psychiatrist, and I learned a lot about the impact of mental health, the stigmatization around mental health, and this is another area that we need to seriously do a lot of work on.
Nikki Ashton, please.
Well, this issue hits close to home. My partner is an advocate on veterans issues, and I'm familiar with some of the struggles that, that veterans face on a daily basis. It's clear to me that our governments, successive conservative and liberal governments, are all too happy to send our young women and men to war, but are not there when they come back and they need help, whether it's from physical injury or mental injury. We saw the kind of cutbacks that Harper made to Veterans Affairs, the closures of the offices across the country, and Justin Trudeau and his government, while they promised a good talk in the last election, didn't deliver. We need to invest in mental health services. We need to invest in frontline services for veterans. We also need to make sure that we live up to the commitment of lifelong pensions to veterans, something that was taken away by Paul Martin and the Liberals in the 1990s. It's clear that we have to stand up and support those who have stood up for us in their time of need.
Guy Caron.
Yeah, but first, we need to train people as well. Prior to the launch of my race, I actually was faced with the death of a veteran in my riding. And that raised to me the importance of not only funding and providing the resources, but also ensuring that we can help veterans with PTSD. Thing is, we only had one specialist on PTSD in the whole area. She's working in Trois-Rivières. She covers an area, the whole east of the province of Quebec. Nobody else can treat or can help in terms of social work, in terms of psychoeducation, veterans or anyone with PTSD, and that's a big problem. So I did meet with the Department of Veteran Affairs to ensure that their strategy that they are saying will be solving will actually be including true training, a true strategy to ensure that more people are formed on the ground and can come and help immediately.
Thank you very much, candidates. We will now have a couple of lightning round questions. I will ask 2 of these questions, and each candidate will get just 15 seconds to respond. The first question is, when it was first established, the NDP was opposed to the GST. Would you keep it or scrap it? Guy Caron, you're first.
I think when we're seeing worldwide, I don't think there's a country without the sales tax. We need to keep the GST. And we have to look at the possibility of increasing it as well. And this is what I would like to study in a tax reform that has to be fully comprehensive to ensure fairness in the system.
Jagmeet Singh, you're next.
You don't make them easy, do you? It's one of those difficult situations. I know here in BC this is a big issue. I know that in terms of international trade, the GST is something that people have been told me is important. I'd like to look at it again and see if there's a way for us to.
Nikki Ashton?
I mean, regressive taxes are not the way to go. I think that perhaps we should leave it as is for now, but what we should be focusing on is a bold tax reform policy that starts by making sure that the rich and corporations pay their fair share, something our campaign is.
Thank you very much. The second question is, if you were elected leader, name one of your opponent's policies that you would champion. Jagmeet Singh, you're first.
Thank you. I just talked about the work agenda that Guy put forward. That work agenda is an excellent agenda. I'd put together the piece on temporary job agencies, and I think we'd have a great piece.
Guy Caron, you're next.
Likewise, but reversed. Well, basically, I think the idea on temp agencies is actually a good idea, and we can only do it at the federal level, of course, with federally regulated industries, but I think it's actually a good policy.
Nikki Ashton?
So I'd say I certainly support a number of the key points in Charlie Angus's Indigenous platform. And in terms of, Guy, your work on the work agenda, I'm intrigued by the idea of reducing the work week. I think it's certainly a bold idea going forward, given the challenges we face.
Great, thank you, everyone. Here's another question for all of you to debate for 2.5 minutes. Coastal communities in BC and around the country that rely on the Coast Guard for navigation, search and rescue, and essential marine communication services fought devastating cuts to Coast Guard funding under the Harper government. Yet, just this spring, the Liberals threatened to cut BC's emergency rescue dive team, reversing course only because of NDP action and public outcry. What, in your view, should the federal government be doing to improve coastal safety?
Coastal safety is an incredibly important issue, not just for the livelihood, but the way of life of people in this region, for Indigenous people. I've had a great chance to speak with Gord Johns about this issue, and we know that overfishing is a massive issue. We need to protect fishing stock, and I know Finn Donnelly's done a lot of work on this issue. There's containment issues around fish farms to make sure that we protect our natural wild stock. But when it comes to coastal services, if we don't have a strong coastal service, we're neglecting the people in this coastal region. We need to make sure that we bolster and support it, not cut funding when it comes to coastal services.
It's all a series of measures. We have underfunded the Coast Guard for so long, and that's not only in the Pacific, it's also on the Atlantic. I know of a case of a First Nations fishing boat which caught fire and took 3 hours for the Coast Guard to actually come because the lone vessel was actually about 3 hours away. So we need resources. We need to ensure that our harbors can actually be safe harbors, and there's been a major neglect of the federal government on this issue. So there's massive reinvestment that will be needed, and the Conservatives in power try to tell us that the cuts were not having any negative impact, even though time after time after time again, we showed them cases of lives being endangered. So we need to reinvest. And Liberals, despite promising it, are not doing a thing on this.
And
It's
another
clear
big
to
thing-
me that as New Democrats, we need to show leadership when it comes to this issue. And I want to acknowledge the work of Finn Donnelly, previously Jean Crowder, and others, MPs across around Vancouver Island who've been on the forefront of this issue. In fact, reversing the cuts to the Coast Guard benefited many across the country, including those of us in inland that have a Coast Guard presence. But when we're talking about BC, we need to recognize that marine life on the water is the way of life. As I've had the chance to travel across the island, around the island the last few days, we talk about marine highways. We talk about how people's livelihoods are based on the water, and we need to make sure that the federal government recognizes that they are a key part of ensuring the safety of citizens that live this life here in the Atlantic and across the country.
Another big issue that we have to also talk about is ferry service too. I know that's something that's massive. It's a way of life for people to get around. We need to make sure that that's also funded. I know it's not exactly your question, but I think it's also an important issue for coastal communities.
Thank you very much, candidates. Here's another question for which you will each get 60 seconds to reply. In Atlantic Canada, government policy keeps fishing licenses in the hands of fishers and coastal communities. But in BC, the federal government has let fishing licenses become licenses to tax fishing folk. In the BC halibut fishery, for example, up to 80% of the landed value of the catch goes to people who don't fish. This situation is bankrupting BC's working fishers. What would you do to change it? Jagmeet Singh, you're up first.
Yeah, one of the things, in addition, we know that fishing licenses are being more and more consolidated, or catches are being consolidated in less and less hands. So you will have a handful of people that own all the rights to fishing. That's not a way to support local communities. That's not a way to build a vibrant fishing industry. That's something that's very regressive. It's not progressive. It doesn't support those communities that make fishing an essential part of their livelihood and their way of life. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that we have an approach to licenses that actually supports local communities, that puts local communities first, that ensures that it can be a vibrant fishing industry in the coastal regions. That's the first step. Secondly, we need to make sure that there's not a consolidation of power in small and less hands. We need to make sure that licenses, fishing in general, is supported at the community level, community-based fishing. It's something that's a big issue also in the Atlantic Ocean as well, where we see deep sea fishing impacting local communities. We need to make sure that we support as many people as possible instead of consolidating.
Nikki Ashton, you're next.
Well, fishing across Canada is increasingly a livelihood that's out of reach of so many because of how expensive it's gotten and the way in which regulations prioritize those that are already working in a corporate sense and make it more difficult for those, whether it's Indigenous peoples, whether it's people that are adjacent to the water, to be able to engage in this kind of livelihood. It's clear to me that many young people, and I know from fishers where I come from, want this kind of livelihood. They want to be out on the water like their parents and grandparents before them. But because governments are not on side to be able to support that work, they're not able to. In the case here in BC, where there's obviously a major federal role to play, as leader, I would make sure to work to change the rules so that fishers, Indigenous communities, folks that are wanting to be part of fishing and provide for their families and their communities are the ones that have access to this livelihood.
Guy Caron, you're next.
Fisheries and oceans is a mess, isn't it? I mean, we've seen it. We've seen it in my neck of the woods as well. We've seen it in Atlantic Canada. We've seen it in British Columbia. First, we need to get back to giving the resource back to the community and ensuring community goes first. Because, when the resource belongs to the community takes care of it. When we're moving towards massive commercial fishing, it leads to overfishing. It leads to predatory practices. It leads to people trying to earn as much from the resource as possible, as quickly as possible, and that leads to overfishing to the detriment of the community. So we need a complete overhaul of fisheries and oceans for British Columbia, for Atlantic Canada as well, that will ensure that the communities which livelihood depends on fishing will actually be the first to have priority in the licenses, and we'll also be there to design the practices and the policies that will help.
Well done, everyone. Now we will have another question period segment where you each get to ask one another a question and respond. You have 30 seconds each. What's different this time around is the candidates must not ask a question of the same candidate that they asked in the first question period. The first question goes to Jagmeet Singh. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Guess who the question is going to, everybody? And the question is going to Nikki. Nikki, I've experienced many of the issues you raise in your racial justice policy. As a trial lawyer, I work with people living it. I fought this issue provincially, and having federal support makes me proud to be a New Democrat. The mandatory minimum sentences introduced by Harper take a punitive approach to communities that are already vulnerable. Will you join me in calling for an end to mandatory minimums and help prioritize community-based sentencing alternatives?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I think that we need to make sure that when we're talking about racial justice, as we have done in our platform, which is the most comprehensive platform on this front, that we're looking at ending systemic racism in the correction system and incarceration, yes, in policing practices, but also in immigration. Harper and even Trudeau have taken us to the right on a number of these, on all of these issues, and we need to be a strong voice as New Democrats for justice for all.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to know your position on solitary confinement. There are huge and negative psychological and physical impacts from solitary. Prisoners are confined for weeks without exercise or meaningful contact with people. It's used as a punishment for some and is often how our correctional system wrongly chooses to imprison trans and non-binary inmates. What will you do about solitary confinement, and will you join me in advocating for inmates in federal prisons?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if you did see our platform, it's pretty comprehensive in terms of talking about addressing a number of the issues in the correctional system. There is no place for solitary confinement. We know this based on evidence. We know this based on the way in which it's often used to target racialized, Indigenous, queer, trans, disabled folks. And I'm very proud that we've put forward a bold platform on a number of fronts. In fact, a platform that's been attacked quite a bit on social media, but I'm proud to have stood up for it.
Guy, you're up next.
Merci beaucoup, Nikki. On a beaucoup parlé du fait au Québec que la plateforme du NPD n'était pas bien adaptée aux réalités québécoises. Puis, en regardant les politiques que tu proposes, je peux percevoir qu'on risque de frapper le même problème. Tu proposes plusieurs mesures, entre autres en éducation et en santé, qui sont de compétences provinciales. Et on sait que le Québec est très protecteur de ses compétences provinciales. Est-ce que dans ce que tu proposes, tu comprends que le Québec aura le dernier mot? Et est-ce que tu comprends que ça pourrait requérir de longues négociations?
Mais en premier, je dirais que, comme néo-démocrate, j'appuie bien sûr la déclaration de Sherbrooke qui s'assure qu'on respecte la position unique du Québec au Canada. Et c'est clair qu'en termes de juridiction, il faudrait respecter la position du Québec sur tous ces sujets. Je serai prête de négocier, bien sûr, sur la question de frais de scolarité, ainsi sur l'assurance médicaments. C'est clair que le Québec est déjà un leader sur ces points-ci aussi. Mm-hmm.
Parce que le danger, évidemment, c'est que Trudeau a promis mer et monde durant la campagne électorale, mais au bout du compte, il n'arrive pas à livrer beaucoup parce qu'il ne veut pas livrer beaucoup ou parce qu'il ne peut pas livrer beaucoup. Lorsqu'on parle de la question du fédéralisme asymétrique, on parle du fait que le Québec peut gérer ses propres programmes. Et dans le cas, par exemple, d'une assurance dentaire qui n'existe pas encore, qui est une proposition, bien, le fédéralisme asymétrique ne s'applique pas vraiment parce que le programme n'existe pas encore au Québec. Alors, j'aimerais savoir de quelle manière tu veux adapter cette réalité avec les négociations qui vont prendre du temps et le fait que tu dises que...
Mais je dirais en premier que, comme j'ai dit, je respecte le fédéralisme asymétrique, la déclaration de Sherbrooke, et je serai prête comme chef d'entrer dans ces négociations. Mais je crois aussi qu'il faut mettre de l'avant une vision audacieuse, une vision progressiste qui s'adresse aux défis que vivent le monde, en particulier les jeunes, même au Québec. Le fait qu'ils vivent dans une vie de plus en plus précaire, qu'ils ont besoin de ces assurances, je crois qu'il faut mettre de l'avant une telle vision.
Nikki Ashton.
My question is to Guy. Guy, one thing is clear to me in this race, that many of us are putting forward key policy, and I appreciate that in your economic policy platform you raised some interesting ideas, including reducing the work week. I believe that as part of any jobs policy, we should be clearly also opposing job-killing trade deals. And in your policy, you make some brief reference to trade deals, but I'm wondering if you could share with us your position on NAFTA and other trade deals that are being proposed.
Yep. I mentioned it actually in the previous answer, which is that we need to move towards fair trade and not free trade. And I think most progressives all progressives are going in that direction, but we need to define what fair trade is, and we have to recognize that we'll need agreements if we want to move towards fair trade. So fair trade, to me, is trade that either is with a country that respects human rights, labor rights, environmental rights, or is as provisions in those trades that increases those rights in the countries that we were signing with. And this is only the first condition. I'll have a chance to go back to the others.
So I believe that we should be taking a clear stand in support of protecting Canadian workers and Canadian communities. If we're going to renegotiate NAFTA, we should be calling for the repeal of Chapter 11. We should be calling for stronger environmental rights. And we should also make sure that we have the ability to come up with our own manufacturing and value-added strategy. I believe that if we're going to face the issues of our time, we need a strong stance on trade and protecting workers. What do you think, Guy?
Well, to go back to the issues, we need to ensure that there is full reciprocity. We get the same access in the country that we sign with as the one that we're giving away. We need to make sure that we win as a whole, as a country. And we need to make sure that workers are not left behind. We had to give them trade adjustment assistance, which was a promise we made to them. If you're talking about NAFTA more specifically, of course, Chapter 11 has to go. Chapter 6 has to go, which prevents us to have control over our own energy. Those are the two main problems with NAFTA.
Thanks very much. Here's another question to all of you for a 1-minute response. This spring, after more than a decade of work by the trans community, allies, and New Democrats, legislation was finally passed to include gender identity and expression as prohibited grounds for discrimination under Canadian law. What needs to be done to ensure trans rights are respected all across the country? Jagmeet Singh, you're first.
Thank you so much. Well, of course, we have to give a special shout out to Randall Garrison for his leadership on this file, for his tremendous work on this file, and for being a champion. We also need to make sure that as Canadians, what we believe in is that we are all in this struggle together, that we all deserve to have equal access to human rights, that equity is a principle that we built this country on. And it's something as New Democrats we strongly uphold and believe in. We know that there's significant issues impacting trans people. Right now, trans people are also faced with an issue where they can't even self-identify the way they want to identify. There's issues around the fact that identification doesn't allow for people to have the ability, first of all, not to have to declare it. It's something, why are we still stuck in a time period where people declare their gender, or if one way or the other? We know that that comes from a tradition where women were actually offered less rights in society. That's where that came from, that you had to declare your gender for that reason. So we need to do significant work on making sure that our society is inclusive and...
Guy Caron, you are next.
Thank you. Obviously, shout out to Randall as well. I don't expect claps or applause. But I will also mention the extraordinary run that Morgane Auger has done here in British Columbia. It was wonderful. There's not much I can add to what Jagmeet said. I mean, the issue is really about protecting people, any people, against discrimination on the basis of who they are. I mean, we're in 2017. It makes no sense that we are still discriminating, and we need to give the full force and full protection of the federal legal apparatus to ensure that we have equal rights, regardless of who we are, who we choose to be, who we don't choose to be as well. And unfortunately, once again, we are facing many obstacles. We did face obstacles under the Conservatives, and despite the hard work that Randall did, it took a while before getting, even with this Parliament, when we were supposed to have a government that was sympathetic to that issue.
Nikki Ashton.
Well, first, I want to acknowledge the work of so many who over a number of years pushed to make Bill C-16 a reality. More recently, of course, Randall Garrison, before him, Libby Davies, Bill 6A, many others. I also want to acknowledge the incredible advocacy of Morgane Auger. It's clear to me that, yes, we took time to celebrate the victory, but what's important is that we make sure that there are resources to be able to implement the legislation in place, resources to allow our human rights bodies to be able to certainly safeguard trans rights and work with those that may now come forward as a result of the discrimination they're facing. We also need to go beyond and make sure that there's tangible investment in addressing the needs that trans folks have in our community. And I'm proud that we are the only campaign that's put forward a gender justice platform, making it clear that we need to invest in fighting the kind of violence that trans, non-binary, and women face on a daily basis. We also need to support gender-confirming surgery.
I have another question, and once again, you'll get 60 seconds for your response. A year after the adoption of legislation to allow for medically assisted dying, many Canadians still face uneven access to the procedure, and debate remains over whether advanced consent should be available to patients who face diseases that include cognitive decline, such as dementia. As leader, would you seek to reopen the medically assisted dying law to address these concerns? Nikki Ashton, you're first.
So just a couple of days ago, we had an event in Port Alberni, and a number of folks raised their concerns with regards to the way this legislation is being implemented and the struggle that they're having with loved ones who are dealing with this right now. It's clear, as I heard from them, and we've heard from others across the country, that this legislation is not being applied the way perhaps the sentiment behind it. There's particular concern raised in terms of those who are living with onset and further developed dementia, and the way in which they are shut out from the opportunity to make that decision as well. Yes, it's important that we revisit this legislation. It was a groundbreaking legislation that many New Democrats, we as New Democrats, pushed for. We need to make sure that it's working for folks that need it. I'd also indicate that, as we've done many times in the House, we must also push for investment in palliative care to make sure that those that need the access and the support have that kind of support going forward in their final days.
Guy Caron, you are next.
Should it be reopened? Of course. I know the work that Murray Rankin has done on this file because he was in that committee along with Brigitte Sansouci. And the committee actually did amazing work because this was groundbreaking. And in the end, we had legislation that had nothing to do with what the committee heard. And the reason is simple. This bill that we had, even though it's groundbreaking because we had nothing before, it was otherwise forced upon the government by the Supreme Court. Well, it was a conservative bill. It's the exact same bill a conservative would have brought forth, which is trying to answer to what the Supreme Court is telling them, but trying to constrain it as much as possible so that we'll give little access as possible. And we're seeing in each province cases upon cases of people being refused the right, this right that was gained through this legislation. So do I want to reopen it? Of course I want to, because I want this bill to reflect the true meaning of what was discussed in committee.
Jagmeet Singh, you are next.
Thank you very much. So we all know that this issue is controversial, but we can all think about another service that was also considered controversial, but we were bold and we never backed down from it, a woman's right to choose. That's also a controversial issue, but we took a strong stance and said that that's something we absolutely need to support and that women should have that choice and have that right. Similarly, when it comes to medical assisted dying, it is controversial, there is different sensitivities, but we need to make it clear what the Supreme Court decision ruled is that people should have that right. And if we want to allow that right to exist, then we need to make sure that people have access to it. A right is meaningless if you have no access to it. A right is meaningless if you can't actually find ways to obtain that service. Then it's a meaningless right. So we absolutely need to reopen the legislation to ensure that this right, this access, that this service is actually accessible, that people can actually find a way to deal with it. But I also agree with what Nikki said around palliative care. We know that this is an extremely important area that we're not seeing enough funding and supports around.
Thank you very much. Here's another question for open debate. You'll have 4 minutes. Here's your question. What policies should the NDP put forward to help artists ensure that they can make real, family-sustaining living as creators?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, first of all, I think our society is much more vibrant. It's more rich. It's more beautiful when we have a society that celebrates arts and allows for opportunities for artists to earn a decent living, for artists to be able to express their creativity. Our society is far better. We've seen that the different policies have worked in jurisdictions like in Ontario. We've seen that credits to support the film industry, to support creative industries, the music industry, have encouraged a creative hub that's growing in Canada. We're known as culture creators and as music creators, even though we've a small population. This is something that we need to enhance and support. This is an area that we need to recognize that precarious employment impacts people in the entertainment sector, in the art sector, more than many other communities. So we need to make sure that we address the precarity of the employment by implementing policies that will address that.
I haven't mentioned.
I would say first that many of the artists I know are precarious workers, and increasingly they're talking about a reality that's rendering them more and more precarious. So yes, we need some targeted action when it comes to supporting the arts in particular, whether it's through grants, whether it's through overall investments, targeting specifically artists based in communities and in diverse regions across the country. But I think we also need to make it clear that our social safety net is increasingly inadequate for those that are living a precarious life. That means we need to make sure that we're ensuring that that our labor code is such that we're putting a stop to abuses of precarious workers, that we're ensuring that we're expanding access to employment insurance that many artists can't access, that we're expanding access to pharmacare, universal dental care, mental health services, something that our campaign has put forward. We also need to look at areas like housing and access to education, and we've put forward free tuition. We need to recognize that as people become more unequal in our country, it's many artists as well that are suffering. We need their work, and we need to support them and all precarious workers.
But going back to artists, I come from Quebec, and obviously Quebec is seen as being this wonderful land of artists. Well, the average wage in Quebec for artists is about $20,000. Obviously, it fluctuates a lot, and there's very successful ones, there's less successful ones. I haven't really mentioned that in this debate, but I do promote a basic income that will ensure that no one will live under the poverty level, the low-income cutoff. And that will come directly to help artists who can actually access it without the fear of having to survive day after day for their food. They can actually create. They can feel free of the stress of having to survive day in, day out. And that will do wonders to help all precarious workers. And I will tell you, artists first and foremost, because tortured artists is actually a myth. People want to actually live. They want to live decently, and then they can create. So there are prerequisites of meeting your basic needs before you can actually start creating. And I can tell you, having a belly full helps with the creation process.
Sure. I think it's also important. I think it's also important to acknowledge Quebec in general as a leader in supporting artists. Though there's still much work to be done, but Quebec has done a lot of work ensuring that artists are celebrated, that their content is promoted and put out into a way that can be consumed by the communities. So I think it's a place where we can learn from, as Guy was saying earlier, we need to learn, not be in isolation, but learn from different provinces on what they've achieved.
I also want to say that we should make sure we have a gendered approach as well. A number of my friends who are artists talk about the fact that they can't access maternity leave if they're having a kid and obviously work in their field. The reality is that many Canadian women don't have access to that, and we need to make sure that, unlike the Trudeau plan on 18-month maternity, which is mostly for wealthy women, that artists and ordinary women.
Here's another question for all of you, and you'll get a minute each for your response. The NDP is unique in the sense that we are one party with provincial sections. While remaining united, these sections don't always agree on specific issues. What would you see as the role of the federal NDP leader in managing regional differences within the party? Jagmeet Singh, you're up first.
Well, I mean, it's a reality with any party, right? You have regional differences. It's incumbent on a leader to understand there's regional differences, to respect those differences. But what we have that unites us all, we have a set of core values that unite us. We're all social democrats. We all believe in equity. We all believe in social justice. We all believe in tearing down barriers to inequality. And so those are the issues and those are the values that guide us. And those values can guide us through some of the difficult issues that come up, some of the regional differences that come up. And it's incumbent on a federal leader to provide that leadership role, to remind people of, listen, where now we have two new democratic premiers in our country. That's phenomenal. That's a beautiful thing. And though there's some disagreements on an energy project, there's so many things, right? Big disagreement. There's so many things we have in common, though. There's so many issues that we fight for. There's so many things that Premier Notley has done that's phenomenal. She stood up for workers. She stood up for students. She stood up for...
Thank you. Nikki Ashton, you're up next.
Well, I believe that as New Democrats, we already know that we are stronger when we work together. We're a party that believes in solidarity, and solidarity means that we work together through thick and thin. Coming from Manitoba, I had the experience of being a member of Parliament, obviously at the federal level, while we were in government at the provincial level. And I will say that there were some issues where we disagreed on federal and provincial positions. But at the end of the day, we worked together, and we knew that what was most important is to make sure that in the next election, we got reelected. And I can tell you now, with one of the most right-wing premiers in the country, we know what we've missed out on. And so if I were to become elected leader, it would be very important for me to work with provincial sections to support the work that they're doing, to support the trailblazing work of the Notley government, of now the Horgan government, of provincial sections that are building in incredible ways across our country, in Saskatchewan, Ontario, Manitoba, across the country. But I believe that we can do that if we work together.
Guy Caron, you are next. Thank you.
Well, we don't talk to each other. I said so in St. John's during the debate. We have the same members all across the country, but we don't talk. A situation like the one on Kinder Morgan was foreseeable. We should have been able to talk this through before it degenerated to what it was. And you know, before the 2000-2005 era, we actually used to meet provincially and federally with the NDP, either with the leader of the NDP federally and the provincial leaders or premiers, or meeting with issues such as the critic for natural resources and environment federally and provincially, or the ministers. We need to go back to that. We need to have regular meetings where we can talk these issues through. If we do, behind closed doors, among ourselves, we can manage those situations. But if we don't, we're coming to the same situation where we are picking up fights in the media, and that doesn't help us. We share the same values, the same members. We have to.
Thank you, everyone. Here's the next question, again with 1 minute response. As a leadership candidate, you are bringing forward a program and a vision for the party and the country. If you were elected, do you believe you should be able to run on that platform in the next general election? Nikki Ashton, you're first.
Well, first I'll start by saying that I'm really proud that our campaign has been clear on the need to put forward a bold, progressive vision to take on the two biggest challenges of our time, growing inequality and the threat of climate change. And it's clear to me as I've traveled across this country through this leadership that that is exactly what people are looking for, people of all generations, but particularly young people. You may have heard a report that came out today that 35% of millennials in Canada live with their parents. That number's higher in places like Vancouver and Toronto. Young people are desperate for bold, progressive ways to take on the inequality they're facing and the catastrophic climate change that they're seeing impact their communities. And so I'm proud of the bold vision that we're putting forward, and we've put out key planks that, yes, we want to continue to push forward with, but we also believe there's room on a number of other areas to build consensus, to hear from New Democrats and progressives on the ground, and move forward to win.
Guy Caron.
By and large, the leadership race is not bringing brand new issues on the forefront. It's really talking about the priorities that we want to set as candidates. This is why sometimes it's so boring, because we all agree, we're all New Democrats, so there's not that much to disagree with. But there are new policies we can put forth. This is what I've done, for example, with basic income. It's not something that goes against the policies of the party. It's a new addition. And when I'm looking at the last poll of NDPers on this issue, we see that 79% of NDPers are in favor of basic income. I can also tell you that at the last convention, there were 12 resolutions on basic income. So basically, I've set that as my priority, the way I set tax reform, which is also NDP priority, electoral reform as my principle. So there's no real need, I think, to actually go forth and say that it's members' will versus the leaders' will, because we are setting.
Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you very much. Well, I think building on what Guy said, when you put forward policies in a leadership race, the idea is to put forward the values. And I hope that people can see that the values that I have are social democratic values, believing in justice and equity. Much like Guy and Nikki, we share so much in common. And I think that though I would be very honored to take many of these ideas forward, all my ideas forward, into a general election, I think it's absolutely important that there's a buy-in from the membership. The membership feels that they're included in the decision as well. The membership feels that these ideas are ideas that the membership also can get behind. So I would do my work to make sure that the policies that I presented, some of the ideas that I'm going to put forward, are ideas that memberships across this country also feel that they can be proud about to bring forward in a general election. So I think there's a certain vision that a leader puts forward, but there's also a lot of hard work in ensuring that the membership either buys into it, and if they don't, there's a disagreement, then we work to make it better.
Thank you, everyone. Now it's time for the last question of today's debate. One more response of 60 seconds each. And the question is, how important is it for the party to have a united voice on a given issue? What is your stance on caucus discipline? Nikki Ashton, you are first.
Well, I would say that, I've had the pleasure of being part of the NDP caucus federally for almost 9 years. I've had the opportunity to work with leaders like Jack Layton, with Tom O'Kerr, with leaders around the table that I've learned a lot about. And it's clear to me that we have, we've gone through a few caucus meetings that get pretty intense. But when we leave the room, we come out united with a very clear goal. And that is the goal of standing up for the people that sent us to Parliament, standing up for working people, those that are living in poverty, those on the margins, and standing up to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, as well as the Conservatives, who are only working on behalf of the interests of their friends, their wealthy friends. And so, yes, it's important that we have those debates, and yes, it's important that we have those disagreements, but ultimately it's important that we stand up, like I said, for those who sent us there and for our values as New Democrats.
Jagmeet Singh, you are next.
Thank you. So I think it's important to say that dissent and disagreement are important things. We learn a lot from disagreement. And so having an opportunity to have different people voice their views and have that discussion that helps generate a better solution are important. But I think we can't lose sight of our goal. At the end of the day, our goal is to implement our principles in this country. We're actually doing a disservice to Canadians if we don't try to get in a position of power so we can implement our amazing progressive social democratic values. So to do that, we need to look at the issue. There's some issues that we must be united. We can't allow for any dissent on issues of equity, of justice, of social justice. And when there's regional differences, the way we manage those issues, that's going to be something that's more difficult. But at the end of the day, we need to see that our end goal is to achieve a position of power so we can implement our principles. We need to be bold, we need to be progressive, we need to be left, but we also need to be united. So these are some key ingredients in terms of how we can actually form government and implement justice.
Guy Caron.
We come from various parts of the country that have different realities, so it's normal that we will see things from a different perspective as well. And those perspectives are shared with caucus, and we have some very heated caucus meetings at times. It happens. In the end, I do think that we need to take a position because, the media are feasting on dissent all the time. And when we are making a decision, it might not be a unanimous decision, but if it's a consensus decision, we need to move. And I've rallied to positions that I was not fully in agreement with, and that's the case, I would say, for all the MPs. Where we need to draw the line is when those policies, those decisions are directly contravening or going against the core principles and values of the party. And when that happens, dissent has to be allowed, and we need to make sure that we are able to express our will, because we are in this party for that reason. That is what is uniting us, those values and principles.
All right, and now to finish our debate, we will have closing statements. Before we do so, though, I just want to remind everyone that there are 2 more debates before the voting begins on August 27th in Montreal. On August 27th in Montreal and September 10th in Vancouver. The candidate showcases in Hamilton on September 17th, and online voting begins September 18th. The most important date, however, is 2 weeks from tomorrow, Thursday, August 17th. That is the date by which you need to have joined the party in order to vote for a leader. If you aren't sure if you are a member or not, or just want to be certain, you can email leadership2017@ndp.ca to check and make sure. Again, that's leadership2017@ndp.ca. Now, let's move to the closing statements. Jagmeet Singh, you're up first.
Thank you very much. Canadians across this country share our values of social, economic, and environmental justice. They're disappointed in the Liberals, though. They want better. C'est pourquoi je propose des plans audacieux pour améliorer la vie des gens. This leadership race is about who will grow our party so we form government in 2019. My team isn't just talking about it. We've opened up campaign offices in BC and in Ontario. We've hired organizers and given leadership roles to over 100 people. We've been hosting national volunteer training sessions and setting up phone banks in living rooms across this country. We are signing up thousands of new members, including people who've never been a part of our movement before. As leader, I will connect with Canadians in ways Trudeau and Scheer simply can't. That's why I'm asking for your support. Together, we will form government in 2019. Thank you.
Nikki Ashton, I saw you raise your card. Thank you. So you'll have 90 seconds. Please begin.
Growing inequality and climate change, more and more Canadians being left behind. On n'est pas arrivé ici par hasard. 150 années de politique conservatrice et libérale sont à blâmer. The common connection, corporate greed, job-killing trade deals, privatization, and deregulation. I've put forward bold progressive ideas that deal with the underlying causes. A climate change plan rooted in citizen, community, and public ownership to move to a carbon-free economy, including investing in green housing. A plan to end a rigged tax system that taxes people one way and the wealthy another, that gives us the revenue for universal pharmacare, dental care, and mental health care. A plan to tackle discrimination, repeal Bill C-51, end the exploitation of temporary foreign workers, and the criminalization of marijuana possession. A plan to form government nationally with a bold, progressive mandate and agenda. Chers néo-démocrates, ce sont nos rêves et nos aspirations qui ont donné au Canada les programmes qui font de notre société une société plus juste. Fellow New Democrats, our dreams have helped create a better society with universal health care, pensions, and EI. It's time to dream again of nothing less than equality and justice for all, and leaving this planet in better shape than we found it. Let's make it happen.
Now with a final word, Guy Caron.
Thank you. My friends, we need to rebuild our party and renew our bonds with Canadians. We need to be ready to face Trudeau and his big Liberal machine. And these are no small tasks. The first step is putting forward a clear and bold vision of what an NDP government would do. We need to show Canadians in every part of the country, rural and urban, and yes, in Quebec, that will be so crucial to our coalition, that we can create the truly progressive Canada we want for our future. Je représente un comté rural et j'ai passé la moitié de ma vie en milieu urbain. I've spent my entire professional life uniting Quebec progressives with like-minded people across Canada. I believe I'm the candidate who is the best positioned to contrast my real progressive experience, values, and plan with the faux progressive Trudeau and to win in every part of our great country. I'm asking for your trust. I'm ready to lead. Join me, and we'll do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Like I said, this Victoria crowd is exuberant. That concludes today's debate, the sixth debate of the 2017 NDP leadership race. Audience, how about a full round of applause for the candidates? You can watch this debate and all past and future debates and events on ndp.ca, where you'll also be able to submit questions. Thanks to everyone who already has. We will be able to use many of them in future debates. Thanks very much to all of the candidates, all of you who've joined us here in Victoria, and everyone watching at home. We'll see you at the next debate in 3 weeks in Montreal. Everyone, have a great evening.